At the center of the hall, a wide dueling circle of polished obsidian gleamed under the glow of suspended orbs. Here, warriors of renown displayed their skill not in battles to the death, but in trials meant to impress, intimidate, and inspire. And today, the audience's curiosity was drawn not to one of their own, but to the lone off-worlder standing within the circle. The human Corporal Daniel Rourke stood motionless in battered combat armor, his helmet's visor down, posture relaxed, but steady. The plating bore scuffs, dents, and faded unit insignias that looked more like the history of a career than any attempt at intimidation. There were no gemstones inlaid, no polished ceremonial flourishes. It was simply practical worn by a soldier who expected to need it. Princess Syria of the Varethi Empire regarded him from the opposite side of the circle, her crimson armor polished to a mirror sheen. Elaborate crests traced the curve of her breastplate, each symbol a mark of her royal heritage and her undefeated record in these honor trials. Tall and lithe, with angular features common to her people, she radiated a confidence that was almost theatrical. She had never faced a human before. The Varethi knew of them, Deathworld, dwellers who had clawed their way into space travel with what many in the Empire considered laughably crude engineering. Dangerous, perhaps, in the way a wild animal was dangerous, but certainly not refined. The kind of species that, in the eyes of the Varethi court, was better suited to mining asteroids than standing in a royal dueling ring. Still, the peace delegation had insisted on including their champion in the day's trials. Syria had expected, well, something more impressive. Instead, she got a silent man in mismatched armor who stood there like a statue. Her smirk curved slowly. "This," she said, making sure her voice carried across the chamber, "is their best?" She glanced toward her advisors, allowing her tone to drip with amusement. Several courtiers chuckled behind jeweled hands. Rourke didn't answer. He didn't even move. Syria tilted her head slightly, stepping forward into the light. "Do you understand the rules, human? No killing, no crippling. You may not even scratch my armor." She tapped her breastplate with 2 fingers, letting the metallic ring echo. "And I am the undefeated champion of my people." A murmur of agreement rippled through the Varethi spectators. For the first time, Rourke spoke, his voice steady and unhurried. "Rules understood." There was no mockery in his tone, no emotion at all, in fact. His words were plain, stripped of ornament, as if acknowledging the statement was merely part of a checklist. Her smirk deepened. This would be quick. The duel. Master stepped between them briefly, announcing the terms once more. The match was to be decided by disarmament, submission, or incapacitation, no lethal strikes, no permanent injuries. Both combatants gave their nod of agreement. Syria's eyes flicked over the human one last time, assessing. His stance was open, not coiled for attack like a trained Varethi duelist. No obvious tells of aggression. No sign that he had the faintest idea what was about to happen to him. What she didn't notice, not yet, was the subtle way he had shifted his weight when she moved. The almost imperceptible turn of his boot, the alignment of his shoulders with hers, the fact that his hands were positioned not in defense, but in readiness. The duel master raised his arm high. "Begin." The sound of the command echoed off the crystal walls. Syria moved instantly, her boots gliding over the obsidian floor, blade drawn in a smooth flourish. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation, already expecting the human to falter in the first exchange. Rourke remained where he was, visor catching the light, silent and unreadable. She thought this would be entertaining. She had no idea it would be the beginning of the most humbling lesson of her life. She expected the human to react like every other unrefined fighter she had faced, by stumbling back, raising a clumsy guard, or attempting a desperate strike. Instead, Daniel Rourke shifted aside by the barest of margins, letting the blade pass. Just shy of his armor. No clashing of steel, no aggressive counter, not even a raised weapon, just a simple, exact movement that cost him no effort. Her brows twitched at the subtlety of it. "Do you intend to fight?" she called, her voice edged with mockery. "Or are you just here to watch?" Rourke didn't answer. His visor tracked her movements with steady precision, not with the frantic energy of prey, but with the unhurried focus of a man gathering information. Syria pressed harder. She feinted high, swept low, then spun with the flourish her people called the crescent arca maneuver, designed to overwhelm opponents with both speed and unpredictability. The crowd murmured its approval of her elegance. The human merely took a step back. Hands relaxed at his sides, letting her pass. By the third exchange, her irritation began to grow. This wasn't how duels worked. In the Varethi tradition, every strike was met with a strike. Every flourish answered with a counter. An opponent who refused to attack was either showing cowardice or mocking the duel entirely. "You may touch my armor," she said with exaggerated generosity, making the nobles laugh. "I promise I won't tell the healers." Still, he said nothing. She drove forward again, aiming for a chest-level strike that would force him to parry or be knocked out of the ring. This time, Rourke didn't retreat. He stepped forward. It wasn't fast, certainly not enough to alarm her, but it was decisive. He slipped inside the reach of her blade in a single stride, his left hand lifting, not to block, but to touch the side of her breastplate. Before she could react, she heard it click. Her eyes flicked down involuntarily. The primary lock on her breastplate, the one securing the front and back plates together, was undone. The lock's mechanism was designed to resist battlefield tampering. It required a trained hand and the correct pressure applied at exactly the right angle. He had done it in less than a heartbeat. Syria's jaw tightened. She straightened, covering her surprise with a smirk. A trick. Impressive. If it were, more than luck. Do it again, if you can. The next exchange came quickly. She darted forward, striking with a rapid three-cut combination meant to keep him occupied. He sidestepped the first, leaned away from the second, then slid a hand along her right side during the third. Click. The side clasp disengaged. The weight of the chest plate shifted subtly on her frame, enough that she felt its instability. The crowd noticed too. Whispers moved like wind through the chamber. Syria's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with the heat of challenge. She doubled her speed, abandoning the graceful arcs in favor of tight, rapid thrusts. She meant to give him no time, no space. But Rourke no longer gave ground. Every step she took forward was met with subtle positioning, his body turning just enough to be in her blind spot, his hands brushing the plates and clasps, as if they were switches on a familiar console. Her shoulder guard hit the floor. The crowd gasped. Then the other shoulder guard followed, sliding free as though her armor itself had chosen to abandon her. By now, Syria's movements had lost some of their theatricality. She wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. She was thinking about him, about how, without striking a single blow, he had begun dismantling her piece by piece. Her breath was steady, but her pride was not. The Varethi royal dueling armor was no common soldier's plating. It was fitted, reinforced, and protected by locking mechanisms known only to the Imperial Guard. The fact that this human could open them without tools in the middle of a fight, it was unsettling. Her fingers brushed the loosened edge of her chest plate. It wobbled faintly with each movement. She masked the reaction with a smirk, though it didn't come as easily this time. "That was clever," she said, voice carrying just enough for the audience to hear. "But you've shown your hand. You won't get close again." She lunged before he could respond. Her saber whistled through the air in a flurry of tight strikes, high-low, diagonal, reverse, each one angled to cut off his movement. This time she would pin him. But Rourke didn't retreat. He moved with her, closing the distance in a way that made her footwork feel suddenly cramped. She swung again, faster now, forcing him to commit to a block. He didn't. Instead, his left arm slipped under her right, guiding it just far enough offline to pass harmlessly past his side. His hand brushed her ribs click. The second side clasp was gone. Her armor sagged at the shoulders now, shifting just enough to make her strikes feel heavier. Her footing wavered as she adjusted to the imbalance. She retreated a step, narrowing her eyes. But she didn't finish. The murmurs of the crowd had grown louder now, and she could feel their eyes on her, not admiring her skill, but watching the slow, deliberate way this human was taking her apart. The nobles in the front rows leaned forward, their jeweled collars catching the light, and some of the younger officers in the stands exchanged glances that stung more than she expected. This wasn't just a duel anymore. It was becoming a display that she attacked again, more aggressively this time. Gone was the ceremonial grace she had opened with. Her blade flashed in jabs and cuts that had no performance value, only intent. She needed to put him on the defensive, to show the hall that the princess could still dominate. But the problem wasn't his defense. It was his absence of waste. Rourke didn't fight like the Varethi at all. There were no flourishes, no feints meant to impress. His movements were stripped to their essentials, just enough to avoid a strike, just enough to close space, just enough to touch a latch or a joint dot by the end of the next exchange. Both of her shoulder guards clattered to the floor. She hadn't even felt him undo them. One moment they were there, the next they were sliding down her arms. A ripple went through the crowd. The duel master said nothing. His eyes narrowed in interest. Now lighter, her armor was no longer a strength, it was a hindrance. Without the full weight distribution, the remaining plating shifted with every motion, throwing off her balance. Syria knew she should slow down, reassess, and adapt. But her pride screamed louder than her training. She came at him again with a sweeping horizontal cut meant to drive him backward. Rourke stepped into it, just into it enough to pass the blade harmlessly behind him. His right hand slid down, and click. The locking clasp that secured her chest plate to her back plate came free. The chest plate didn't fall immediately, it hung for a moment, held in place by friction and her own movement. But she knew the moment she made the wrong move, it would drop. The crowd was silent now. She tried to speak, to reclaim the momentum, but the words caught in her throat. He was looking at her, not as an enemy, not as prey, but with the calm of a man who had already calculated the outcome. Where once the space had thrummed with the murmurs of nobles and the metallic ring of clashing weapons, now there was only stillness. No one spoke. No one coughed. Even the duel master's voice had gone silent. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the center of the obsidian ring, where a human soldier and a Varethi princess circled one another like mismatched predators. Syria's armor hung loosely now, held together by little more than gravity and stubbornness. The once imposing crimson chest plate wobbled with each step, threatening to slip free. Her shoulders felt naked without their guards, her arms light but unbalanced. Every breath reminded her of how exposed she was becoming, but she wasn't finished. "Not yet. You think this is over?" she said, her voice sharp, the edge of pride cutting through the strain in her tone. "I'm still standing." Rourke didn't respond. He simply moved. There was something deeply unnerving about his silence. Varethi duelists were never silent. They bantered, they taunted, they roared their dominance. But this human offered nothing to work with. No tells, no emotion. Just the slow, steady advance of a man who had no need to prove anything to anyone. Struck first, her blade darting toward the joint in his armor where the shoulder met the chest. It was a risky attack, high commitment, easy to counter, but she needed to make him move, to force a mistake. He didn't give her one. Instead, his left hand came up not to block, but to redirect. He brushed the flat of her blade aside as if swatting a leaf from his path. His right hand followed, sliding down her midsection with the precision of a mechanic dismantling a familiar engine. Click. The final clasp. Securing her armor belt came loose. The weight of the plating pulled downward, and this time there was nothing to hold it in place. The crimson chest plate slipped, bounced once against her thigh, and fell to the obsidian floor with a resounding clang that echoed like a gavel strike. Gasps swept the audience. Somewhere in the crowd, a jeweled fan snapped shut in shock. The duel master raised one hand not in warning, but in declaration. "By the rules of this trial," he said, voice carrying through the silent hall, "the human has fully disarmed the princess. The match is decided." Syria stood frozen. Her saber was still in her hand, but it felt suddenly meaningless. The armor stand at the edge of the ring might as well have been hers now. She wore only the black combat mesh beneath her plating, a garment meant to be unseen, clinging to her like a second skin. The absence of weight was liberating for her body but suffocating for her pride. She opened her mouth, the beginnings of a retort forming on her tongue, something to reframe the moment, to salvage some dignity. But the words died before they reached her lips. Because Rourke was looking at her. It wasn't a gloating look. There was no smirk, no triumph, no need to grind the defeat in. It was simply a level gaze, calm and unreadable, as if to say, this was never personal. It was just the job. She realized then that he could have humiliated her far worse. He could have dragged out the process, made each clasp a spectacle, drawn cheers from his own delegation. Instead, he had taken her apart with surgical precision, and ended it the moment the rules allowed. The duel master's voice faded into the background. The crowd's whispers blurred into a dull roar in her ears. All she could hear was the echo of metal on stone and the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Rourke stepped back, retrieved his helmet from where it rested on the floor, and placed it under his arm. He didn't bow. He didn't salute. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. No victory pose. No words. Just a quiet departure. And that, somehow, struck harder than any blow could have. The dueling hall was nearly empty by the time Syria left the ring. The crowd had dispersed into the palace corridors, their conversations buzzing like a swarm of unseen insects. She could hear them even from here, fragments of her name, the word human, and the clang of her armor hitting the floor replayed in countless retellings. Her own armor was gone from her body, carried away by attendants who said nothing, their eyes carefully averted. Now she wore a long ceremonial robe draped over the black combat mesh, its soft folds doing little to shield her from the sting of the day's events. In the privacy of her quarters, the robe slid from her shoulders and pooled at her feet. Royal dueling armor stood upright on its stand in the corner, still gleaming under the light. Every clasp and plate was perfectly intact, each one a reminder that none of it had been damaged. It had simply been taken, piece by piece. She approached it slowly, running her fingers over the central lock of the breastplate. The mechanism clicked in her hand. It was an elegant piece of engineering, one that resisted attempts to force it open. Varethi duelists were trained to recognize and counter such attempts, yet she hadn't even realized he was working the locks until they came loose. She replayed the fight in her mind, step by step. He hadn't been faster than her, at least not in the way she'd been trained to recognize. His movements had been economical, precise. Every time she attacked, he seemed to already know where she was going. He never wasted a gesture, and he never once struck in anger. That last part lingered. The Varethi fought to dominate, to assert position, to command respect. But the human had fought with the focus of someone solving a problem, not for glory, not for honor, not even to defeat her. He had simply done what needed to be done without adding or taking away more than necessary. The robe rustled faintly as she sat, elbows on her knees, hands pressed together. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of a lesson she had not chosen to learn. When the soft chime at her door sounded, she almost ignored it. But the voice that followed froze her in place. "Permission to enter, princess?" It was him. She took a steadying breath. "Enter." The door slid open, and Daniel Rourke stepped inside, still in his armor. The helmet was clipped to his belt now, leaving his face visible, calm, unreadable, yet without hostility. He came to a stop a respectful distance away. "You came to gloat?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light, though it landed somewhere closer to defensive. "No," he said simply. The single word carried no bite, no mockery. It was just the truth. Silence hung between them for a moment before she said quietly, "You could have humiliated me far worse. You didn't." "Wasn't the mission?" he replied. The phrase puzzled her. "Mission?" "I was asked to represent my people," he said. "That means winning without causing damage we can't fix later." Humiliation leaves damage. Her gaze dropped. That was the part she had never considered. In her culture, a duel was a weapon for reputation as much as combat skill. A humiliating defeat was a political tool. But here stood a man who had dismantled her in front of her people, and yet walked away without taking the prize such a victory offered. It wasn't mercy. It was discipline. She realized then why her taunts in the arena had never landed, why he had ignored them entirely. Humans, at least this one, did not fight to perform. They fought to end. When he left, she didn't stop him. She only watched as the doors closed behind him and the echo of his footsteps faded. That night, she stood at the window of her quarters, looking out at the sprawling lights of the Capitol. The words she would carry for the rest of her life whispered through her mind. Do not mock a human soldier, not because they will take offense, not because they will answer in anger, but because they will act, and when they do, they will leave you with nothing to say.